All right, welcome to our tutorial for our daily review. This is for question number 6, which is talking about factors and greatest common factor. Like we often start out our tutorials, we're going to describe some of our vocabulary terms that are important for us. In this case, the vocabulary word is factor. So let's describe some things that we know about factors. Factors are the numbers that create a given number by multiplication, so what we multiply to get another number. There are always a limited number of factors. It doesn't matter if I pick a really small number like the number 3 or a really big number like the number 100. There will always be a limited amount of factors. And this is an important difference because people often make mistakes and confuse factors and multiples. And if you remember from our tutorial about multiples, which was question number 5, there is an infinite amount of multiples, but there is always a limited number of factors that exist. And our final tip to remind us about is oftentimes people think about factors as what a number can be divided by. And when we say can be divided by, we know we can divide by anything, but we want to focus specifically on what can we divide it by to get even whole numbers is what we want to end up with. So let's go ahead and do some examples of some factors. I'm going to give us the number 2, and we'll see if we can find some factors of the number 2. Remember, factors are the numbers that create a given number. In this case, that given number is 2 by multiplication. So we might want to start thinking about what numbers can I multiply together to get 2? Or the other way that you can think about this is what can that number 2 be divided by evenly? And hopefully most of us know our factors of 2 pretty easily. In this case, it is simply 1 times 2. That is the only way I can get to 2 using whole number multiplication. So my factors of the number 2 are 1 and 2. Both of those are factors of the number 2. Now, we're going to look at another example. Let's go ahead and look at 10 as an example. And as I create this list for a little bit bigger number, something that has some more factors in it, one of the things to notice is another distinction about our factors compared with our multiples. So when I write my list of multiples, I often write that list of multiples out horizontally or side to side. And you're going to notice as I do my list of factors, I'm going to write those out vertically. And you don't have to do it that way, but that's one great way to keep a distinction between factors and multiples. Since those are commonly confused, people mix those things up frequently. And so I like to write them totally different so they don't look alike. So I'm going to start with the number 10, and I'm simply going to write out a list. In this case, you can write your list out 4, 5, 6. I'll start out with the first 5 numbers. And as I do this, the questions I'm asking or the things that I'm thinking about is what can I multiply to create the number 10, or what can the number 10 be divided by evenly with whole numbers? So in this case, I can know that 1 times 10 is equal to 10. Most of us know that math fact automatically, and that's great. And we can continue to work this out. So I could think about what number I can multiply by with 2. So 2 times something will equal 10. And if I don't know that, this one's still pretty easy, but if I don't know that, I can always ask that other question about what I can divide it by. And I could go 10 divided by 2 will give me that factor pair. In this case, that would be 2 times 5 would equal 10. Or if I did 10 divided by 2, that would give me 5. Now, I have my list. I can ask those same questions. If I think about 10 divided by 3, I'm not going to get anything. And same thing with 10 divided by 4. Again, I can get an answer, but these aren't whole numbers. They're going to end up with decimals, and we want to focus only on whole numbers. And so far I only have 2 factor pairs or 4 total factors. And then I'm down to the number 5, and you're going to notice that 5 times 2 is there. And once I start to see that list repeat, in this case, I already had 2 times 5. I see the number 5 show up again in my list, and I can actually stop right there because I know that I have the total amount of factors that is ever possible. There's no more factors possible for the number 10. So I could think about the factors of the number 10 as being 1, 2, 5, and 10. And then we're asked in this question, number 6, to find the greatest common factor. That's simply found by comparing the 2 lists. We had the number 2 and we had the number 10. We're comparing the list of factors in those 2, and we simply want to write the biggest number or the greatest that's in both of those lists. In this case, we only have one shared factor. We have 2 shared factors. The number 1 and 2 are in both lists, but 2 is the biggest of those numbers, and so 2 is our greatest common factor. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we can use a multiplication chart to help us find factors of some different numbers. In this case, we just did the number 10, so we're going to use the number 10 again as an example here. The first thing that I'm going to do, if I'm thinking about what factors are the numbers that I multiply together to get my given number. In this case, my given number is 10, so I want to know what I can multiply to get those numbers. Well, I can find that really easily by looking for anywhere the 10 shows up on the inside of my multiplication chart. In this case, I've circled all of the 10s that I see on my multiplication chart. And the great thing about this is you don't have to do them in any particular order. You just want to look and find any 10s that show up in our multiplication chart. Once I've done that, I'm going to look at what created those 10s. And so just like we described before, we know 1 times 10 is one of those. And I know that because if I look on my multiplication chart, 1 times 10 is what gave me the 10. And we could do the same thing with 2 times 5. And I can look for what numbers created those, and it was a 2 and it was a 5. Notice that the factors are always on the outside of the multiplication chart because factors are the numbers that we multiply to get our other numbers. So that's a way that you can use a multiplication chart to find our factor pairs. In this case, we already know that our list is done at that point. So let's go ahead and look at another example. In this case, we will look at the number 24. Now, there's a couple of things that are slightly different about this than what we did before, and that's why I wanted to show us one more example. In this case, I'm going to start by doing the same thing, and I am going to circle any place that I see the number 24 show up on the inside of my multiplication chart. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and write my list. This is just like we did with the number 10. In this case, I'm going to count it up to 6, and I'm thinking about what numbers can be multiplied to get the number 24. Now, when I did the number 10, I went up to 5. In this case, I'm going up to 6. Sometimes you might need to go up to 7 or 8. Sometimes you might only need to go up to 4. It's a little bit different for every number, but it's always good to start. If you start with 5 or 6, that's usually a good place to start out. And now I'm going to look on my multiplication chart, and I'm going to notice what numbers I'm multiplying to get the 24s that are on the inside. So the first one that I see is I saw 3 times 8. And so those would both be factors of the number 24. I also saw a 4 times 6. So those would be factors of 24. And I'm looking in the 5 column and there was nothing there. So I can cross that out of my list. And then I'm going to also notice that 6 is repeating. And we're talking about those repeating things. Once that 6 repeats, once my list repeats, I'm done. I don't have to find any more factor pairs. However, there is something that's really important for us to consider in this example, and that is that our multiplication chart is limited. It only goes up to the first 10 numbers that we are multiplying. And so we still have to ask those questions. What can I multiply to get 24? Or if I divide 24 what can I get evenly there. So in this case, I would want to make sure I'm thinking 1 times a number 24 would equal 24. In this case, in order to have that on our multiplication chart, we would need a multiplication chart that went at least until 24 so that we could see that 1 times 24. We could do the same thing with the number 2 and think about where that would take us. So 2 times 12 would get us to the number 24. And same thing here, you can kind of think if we continued our multiplication chart, we ended at 20, we would have 22, and we would end up with a 24 over there somewhere. And so 2 times 12 would equal our 24. That's a tip about how you can use a multiplication chart to find our factor pairs. Remember, our factors are always on the outside edges. They're the numbers that create our given number by using multiplication. Thanks for checking out the tutorial for question number 6, and I look forward to helping you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.